Civil engineers are facing bigger challenges than ever in the world that we live in. However, budgets seem to be shrinking. Companies want engineers to work faster, but they want them to solve larger problems. Well, in this episode of the Civil Engineering CEO, I am thrilled to have with me Stephen O'Malley. Stephen is a chartered civil engineer. He is also a founding partner of Civic Engineers located in Manchester in the United Kingdom. And Stephen is passionate about urban infrastructure. He's going to talk about how leaders of civil engineering firms and organizations must support, lead, and inspire their engineering professionals to really hone their craft and help to solve some of the world's biggest challenges like climate change. And he talks about how what we do as civil engineers impacts every part of the neighborhoods where we live and work. It's a really exciting conversation touching on some of the biggest challenges that we face as civil engineers and as human beings, and I'm thrilled to share it with you. All right, now I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show for today. Stephen O'Malley is the Chief Executive at Civic Engineers, and Stephen's located in Manchester, England, over in the UK. Our first guest on the show from the UK. Stephen, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor.
No, we're happy to have you. So, Stephen, let's jump in here. But before we do, and we talk a little bit about your career, tell us a little bit about Civic Engineers. Talk to us about the company, the services you provide, just to give everyone a backdrop.
Well, Anthony, the company is called Civic Engineers because we believe in the place and the people. And we thought Civic Engineers had quite an interesting play on words with civil engineers. And we also wanted to pivot back to the origins of the profession and its connection back to society. And those principles are the enshrining founding principles of the practice, which at this point is now 10 years old. And we've grown into those principles. And over those 10 years, the projects and our behaviors and the things and ideas and interests that we've been advocating and championing for have been the manifestation of those principles. And we clearly have built up the momentum over that period, and what we're hoping is to continue to do so. In terms of the sort of core disciplines, there's three primary strands, and that's basically civil engineering, structural engineering, and transport planning. And in absolute honesty, we see those three strands as being highly integrated in a very holistic way. So they're all interdependent pieces of the same story.
Yeah, that's great. And that's certainly one of the reasons that we reached out to Stephen. I mean, you can connect with him on LinkedIn, but he talks a lot about on his profile about, how you feel that the civil engineering world is really, shaping the built environment. And we're going to get into that a bit today. And it sounds like that's kind of hence the name Civic, right? So it's it all makes sense. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about your career. We have civil engineers that are watching, that are interested in growing their careers. Throughout your career, you take us through your journey on your career. What have been some of maybe the biggest facilitators of your professional development and going kind of from one role to the next in your career?
Well, I guess the primary driver has been the rather lofty ambition of trying to change the world through the form of engineering, which has always been a North Star for me in choosing the profession of civil engineering. You mentioned Manchester in the UK as the geographic city point for this conversation, but actually I'm a Dubliner. I'm actually Irish. Now, I appreciate in American terms that distance probably isn't very much in actual geographic difference, but it means a huge amount in terms of cultural difference.
Sure.
But I've been in the UK for the last 25 years, having left Dublin with a civil engineering degree. And I found myself, fortunately, involved in sort of civil engineering construction projects. But after about 4 years of that, I came across a company with these amazing drawings, which just really spoke to me. And I reached out to the owner of that company and arranged to meet him. And on the back of that conversation, he then gave me a job on the consultancy side. So I kind of went from, I don't know whether it's gamekeeper to poacher or poacher to gamekeeper, but I crossed the line from the construction side to the design side around 2000. in that practice, I was involved in quite a number of really strategic regeneration scale projects. So these are sort of neighborhood renewal programs. And this is where you might come into a city and you're completely redesigning, reconfiguring the entire composition of a neighborhood. And that might be like 30, 50 acres of city. And you're dealing with canals and culverted river courses and trying to make those places, completely reimagine them and reframe them. They're typically derelict, abandoned places, and you're trying to refresh their stories and give them new life and give them a much more positive, forward-facing future. And I did have the privilege through those projects of working with some really innovative architects and urban designers and government officials, which then led to we all know about the financial crash of 2008, which was a very tough period. The fallout from that financial crash meant that practice didn't really survive the pressures of that period, which led me and my colleague Julian Broster to then set up Civic Engineers, which was built on those same principles, but gave us clearly a lot more freedom and control over how we might employ them and how we might develop them and then how we might deliver them. And that's what we've been burnishing and polishing and refining over the last 10 years to get us to this point today. And at this point today, the practice is, as I've mentioned, based on those core disciplines, but it's the alchemy and the really interesting bit that happens when you blend those different types of skills and experiences together to create something quite special that's massaged into the prevailing geography and capitalizing on the character and heritage of a place and really showcasing those qualities to tell those stories and to attract the investment and to make them a really, really enjoyable place for people to spend time in. And of course, in turn, that then attracts more investment and makes those places very desirable. And I've managed to find myself in a position where I've been involved in a number of those types of projects right the way across the UK. In fact, I'm dialing in today from the sunny streets of Glasgow. We have an office here in Glasgow, and right behind me here is Virginia Street, right in the centre of Glasgow city centre in Scotland.
Wow, that's awesome. So I got a couple of follow-up questions on that. So first of all, you mentioned that you went from the construction side to the design side. I've always found in talking to civil engineering professionals that it's extremely beneficial to get into construction, get into the field early on in your career. And it's very beneficial when you then go into design because you really understand what's going on out in the field. Can you attest to that? Can you speak to how that transition was for you and how that helped you?
Oh, 100%. I think that hands-on experience really helps you as a designer appreciate the complexities and the challenges of those choices that you make as a designer and how deliverable and how practical they are in the field, particularly when you're dealing with the variabilities of the weather and from a civil engineering perspective, certainly dealing with ground conditions. So when you're looking at mass bulk excavations and handling of earth and earth movements, an appreciation of those very practical issues is super beneficial and has definitely helped shape and inform how I approach things as a designer.
Yeah, for sure. And your firm today is roughly how many people?
It's 160 people at the moment.
160. Okay. So I think it was about 15 years ago or so that you started the company, correct?
2013, 10 years this year.
10 years this year. Okay. So 10 years ago, you made this transition, obviously huge career transition. You kind of explained it to us. You decided to start the company with a co-founder. You're up to 160 people. That's a lot of growth, a lot of people. Talk to us about that decision because we get so many civil engineers that contact us that are interested in, really wanting to start their own business and grow their own firm. You explained a little bit of what was behind it, but take us really into the decision. I mean, it's obviously one there's a lot of risk involved. Talk about what really pushed you to make that decision in that process a little bit for us.
Well, people and planet are the focus of the things that our design is orientated towards, and design excellence in supporting and fostering and nurturing the lifestyles and public health and well-being, protecting the planet are essential ingredients to the thinking that we wanted to employ and have control over in terms of that design. And Civic Engineers provided us with the form and the medium and the vehicle to allow us to do those things. So really, really strong emphasis on people and planet, but actually design excellence is the underpinning quality that allows us to really optimize those choices. I would add that in this era of growing artificial intelligence, I would contend that engineers have painted themselves into a corner a little bit in recent decades with a very not limited but heavy emphasis on technical excellence. And technical excellence, there's no substitute for that. That's essential, right? That's now entry level. But what we now need to do as a profession, I would contend, is now apply that technical excellence with a much higher degree of emotional intelligence. We need to think far more carefully about the communities and the landscape and the environment, the politics, the neighborhoods, all of those factors. It's no longer just a case of turning up and just running some numbers and saying, there's the answer. It's actually being much more environmentally aware, being much more socially responsible. And in doing so, I do believe that you actually create more value, and you create places and contribute to the creation of places that are longer lasting, and people fall in love with them. It's about the experiential quality of these places. And it's, I think there's a real need for engineers to get more in touch with their emotions and experience things, fall in love with things. A little bit of poetry involved in engineering is what's needed, or more, I would contend.
Yeah, no, that's great. It does seem like, all this time as you've grown the company, it seems like your passion and your mission that you just explained to us is really very, evident in what you do from, again, like I found you online, like I said, because that kind of comes through in your profile that want to be very connected to the environment, the projects that you work on, the high quality, and, the usability of these projects, right? The user experience is so important. So, it's great to hear that. So let's talk a little bit about projects. Oh, go ahead, Stephen, please.
There's another word that pops into my mind as you make those remarks, Anthony. I'm really heartened that that seeps through in the points of contact, but actually authenticity is key. It's got to be rooted meaningfully in of the people and of the place. It's not cut and paste. It's very much crafted and bespoke and tailored to the specifics of the conditions, whether that's the prevailing landscape or the particularities of a community that you get the privilege, or I get the privilege, and we as engineers get the privilege of trying to help and support. So authenticity is absolutely vital.
Yeah, and I'm glad you made that point, because kind of to your point earlier, with everything going on with AI, I do think sometimes engineers aren't getting as much credit for their engineering knowledge and creativity that goes into a design or a problem that you're solving, because people tend to think, hey, you punch it into this program and it spits out an answer, right? So I do think that authenticity, to your point, will become more and more important as we go forward here, because, yes, we need to some degree leverage the technology, but to some degree maintain our craft and, the knowledge that we have, that we need to be able to solve these problems. So, Stephen, can you maybe think of one of your projects that you worked on over the years that really, like, when you look back on your project, something that might stand out to you that was a really exciting project, or something that was really special to you? I mean, you probably have a bunch, but is there one that maybe jumps to mind for you?
Well, I think one of the really interesting things with projects of this scale is time. And if you are looking to try and change a city district, it's not something that gets measured in single-digit years. It tends to be measured in decades. So I'd circle back to a project I was involved in Manchester, as it so happens, first involved in 2001, where, again, I had the privilege of working with a very, very talented maverick urban designer called Will Alsop Design, and he developed a master plan for the Cardroom estate in East Manchester. And this part of East Manchester was a tough neighbourhood, and had lots of, had all the hallmarks and sort of typical traits of a neighbourhood that had been a little bit forgotten about and marginalised and sort of left to its own devices. And through that master plan and then the delivery of the infrastructure to support that new reinvigorated neighbourhood, there was the creation of a new water park, a new canal system, the provision of new schools, new medical facilities, local retail, local commercial, and then about 2,500 new homes, all of which were predicated on the basis of being able to walk or cycle to the facilities that they needed within short distance of where they lived. And that project is now 20 years since pen first touched paper. Wow. And it's now one of the most popular neighborhoods in the city. And while the tenants and some of the occupants of the lower income families remain as residents, and more of that cohort have ended up living in that neighborhood, the wider group has meant that actually it's really, really attractive and really valuable in terms of property prices and also commercial activity, and the vitality of that neighborhood is what drives the footfall, is what brings the investment in, and is what makes that a really, really attractive part of the city. So that is a really standout project for me. But of course, I had a role to play in that, but successful projects of that type involve many people, and the city themselves deserve a huge amount of credit for investing in those ideas, which were pretty innovative 20 odd years ago.
No, I really appreciate your description of that project. And really, I think what I like about the way that you tend to frame out civil engineering is less about using kind of the words projects, but more about transformation, right? Like civil engineers like tend to be able to transform neighborhoods, cities, structures, etc. And I really think that that's something that comes through with you from, like you said before, your mission and everything else. Because I think, again, I think that's another danger of engineering, is that it can be seen sometimes as very transactional as opposed to very transformational. And it seems to me like you're really focused on the transformative side of it. Like you see, like you use the word, investing in communities, and like a lot, like putting that investment in. So that's something that sounds like you're really passionate about.
Yeah, and a really interesting point that pops into my mind with your observations there is about the sort of organic qualities of these projects, because there is a need, a business case, an economic case, a derivation for funding and a securing of funding, and then development of a master plan, and then all this physical stuff happens. But actually, it's the sort of organic stuff that takes time to sort of evolve and grow and occupy these spaces. And I think what's quite interesting in recent years is the growing realization actually of, so let's stop battling with nature, and building on that idea and theme of ecological systems and rhythms, using nature-based solutions for engineering. So rather than hardscaping and hard landscaping and trying to control nature, actually using things like sustainable drainage systems and rills and rain gardens and deculverting water courses and allowing water to filter through a softer landscape, and taking advantage of all of the qualities that come from that in terms of amenity and biodiversity. Because actually, as human beings, particularly as our cities densify, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the densification and repopulation of cities is a really positive thing. It's inherently sustainable. Because the concentration of life in those spaces, if it's designed and operates well, can be very satisfying and fulfilling and really, really powerful. But actually allowing that same urban environment to accommodate natural habitat, to allow insects and wildlife and birds and other things occupy our urban landscapes, it means that we've got a more direct connection with nature. The other key advantage of that, of course, is that it also helps ameliorate the worst effects of flooding. And certainly in the UK and in Ireland, flooding and heavy rainfall is an issue. So creating a landscape that can absorb and then slowly release that water back into natural networks is very, very valuable for the climatic resilience of urban areas across the UK. The other part of that is, while the climate has become wetter in many respects across the UK, it's also become hotter. And using trees and soft planting for shading reduces the urban island heat effect of urban environments, which again provides that climatic resilience and improves the public health and well-being of the citizens of these towns and cities.
Yeah, again, I think that you're really like elucidating like the value of engineering in a lot of different ways and why it's important for engineering professionals or design professionals to think about, holistically with a project and a neighborhood and the ecosystem around it, because really everything that we do can have such an impact on that, which again is something that I personally think that we as an industry need to do a little bit of a better job about educating people about, which I think is one of the reasons that there is a bit of a shortage of civil engineers, if you will, because I think that they don't understand how much impact they can have on the environment, on society, on the world globally. But that being said, I want to ask you a couple questions about your team growing your firm. A couple of years ago, obviously, COVID came and it caused a lot of disruption throughout globally. And, I think before that time, a lot of civil engineering companies would tell you that they could never work remotely. It just wasn't possible. It didn't fit our industry. It doesn't fit what we do. But seemingly overnight, 99% of civil engineering firms went remote. So I'm curious as to your philosophy of how, the changes that we've made to our workflow, the virtual, the hybrid, will impact us going forward as engineering firms and organizations. And how you've seen it affect your firm, especially culturally, because I know when I speak to leaders in firms right now, one of I think the concerns they tell me most of the time is I'm really focused on the cohesiveness of my people in kind of the world and the layout that we live in today. So I know there's a lot there, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on just how it's changed our workflow and the way we work and how we build our firms.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely critical questions, absolutely fascinating questions. And as you say, within the space of 6 weeks, we've managed to figure out an alternative way to achieve the things that we've been hardwired to believe were unchangeable up to that point. And I think actually working from home has had a huge amount of positive positive impacts on lots of different things. So there's kind of two departments of that conversation. One is actually about the urban design, spatial arrangement, composition of our towns and cities. Because what working from home has meant is that people realised that commuting an hour each way every day was crazy in terms of how they were spending their time,
Right.
and and the rhythm of their day. We're finding now that I've kind of jumped across into the other box, but never mind. That the flexibility that people want in their day means that they might do 8 hours in the day, but that might be fragmented out over the course of a 12, 14-hour period.
Right.
And that's absolutely fine, because that means that they can have more time with their kids, or they can sort out the plumber, or they can do a bit of grocery shopping, or whatever it may be, and blend their day together in a much more sophisticated way, but actually in a richer and more fulfilling way. And an important part of that is actually their neighborhood, and their ability then to be able to engage with their neighborhood in a way that allows them to exercise and meet their neighbors, be more sociable. So actually, it has lots of impacts in that sort of
Hmm.
urban infrastructure, urban design sense too. On a business side, commercial side, I would say be careful what you measure, because if you're measuring the perceived benefit of people being sat in a given location for a set period, well, what does that look like at the end of the month? Have they actually produced? How productive have they been? How happy are they in themselves? We've always been, look, we've got lots of issues. We know we need. There's lots of room for improvement for us, and I'm not claiming to have found any sort of holy grail in solving these really complex problems, but trying to figure it out and enjoy it. If we're just candid with each other and open about it, there is a way to figure it out. There's got to be a sort of an openness and a trusting environment, and I hope that's a key feature that the broader team within Civic Engineers would report back. The number of people that choose to leave Civic Engineers is actually very low. We don't press people in terms of trying to sweat them or over rev them. We treat them with a high degree of respect, and they repay that in spades, because they realize we've got this shared vision of what it is collectively we're trying to achieve. They've subscribed to that agenda, and they take ownership of that. And we haven't found the need to try and clock watch or manage that. There's always going to be, a couple of percentage points that are a rogue element, and they tend to bubble up to the surface pretty quickly, over a sort of 3-6 month period. And you can have that conversation and you go, well, maybe this isn't the right forum for you. Maybe our futures lie in different directions. And that's always been sort of understood. And I think colleagues and peers of those individuals tend to put a little bit of positive pressure on them in that sense as well. It's like, don't ruin it for all of us. If you're not going to perform, that doesn't seem fair within the overall mix. If the company is being fair with us and reasonable with us, well, it's only understandable or to be expected that for us to perpetuate that responsibility and that sort of understanding, we've got to contribute our bit. So that's the underlying ethos. Clearly, you're always going to get quirks and oddities, Anthony, in that mix that don't always quite fit, but those numbers and that percentage has actually been very low.
That's great. Yeah. And I like that. I mean, I think, and not to get too much into the productivity behind it, but I think if someone goes to an office for 8 hours and sits there for 8 hours and works, or if someone's doing those 8 hours spread out over a 14-hour day, like you suggested, I mean, odds are the person who sits down for 8 hours in a row just can't be as productive in one stretch of time. I mean, you just get tired, the kind of work that we do, right? It becomes very difficult. So, and I really like the benefits that you described in terms of their own community and their neighborhood and getting out and seeing people, which, for years before COVID, a lot of people that had these corporate jobs who maybe would commute to a city, they didn't even know their neighbors. They wouldn't even know who they were. Literally, like, I don't know the person who lives across the street from me because I'm literally home when it's dark and I leave when it's dark, type of thing. So I think that that's a promising part of it. And one other question that I want to ask you on this, Stephen, is, you seem like someone who is very thoughtful, when it comes to your projects, very cerebral. You think through the different aspects of it and how they will affect the communities and the neighborhoods and so on and so forth. And again, that comes through in your company and your mission. One of the things I think that we're really struggling with in today's world is the ability to think like that, right? Because everything is 150 miles an hour. Everything is, I need it yesterday. Everyone's running in a lot of different directions. And I'm just wondering how, I guess you personally, and maybe also how do you encourage your team members to be very thoughtful and take the time so that they have that creativity, they can breathe that creativity. Whereas a lot of companies out there in the industry are just focused on the billable hours, crank those hours out. And I know that you have to be profitable to run a company, but also I know that we need to think through certain problems and challenges. So I wonder I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, that is the way I do approach projects. At least I try to approach them that way. And I think role modeling that type of approach is evidently critical, because if I can't do it, well, it doesn't leave much room or hope for others in my group to be able to do it. There is a really excellent wider management group or executive within our company that help motivate and observe and reach out to check on the people and make sure that their voices are being heard, and we're not becoming detached or diverging from where our wider center of gravity is as a business. So we keep getting quite rightly anchored back in to the realities of how people are having to deal with that. But I think perhaps the fundamental point here is actually about risk. And there has been a sort of pursuit of risk aversion in our profession over the last 50, 60 years in particular. And I don't think it's led us in the right direction. What I feel is far more valuable is actually risk engagement and thinking through risk and rather than saying, oh, here's a problem. This problem has been something that our industry has recognized time and time again. I don't know, contamination or a particular material or an issue around resolution between the competition for space between cars and cyclists, whatever it might be. And the convention has been, this is how we deal with it. And you kind of just incorporate that as the path of least resistance to get to the answer. as fast and as efficiently as possible. But the answer that you then get doesn't actually really deal with the underlying problem. And what I think we need to do is just be brave enough to sort of engage with that directly. And that's not always easy, but the point here being that if we set that approach and mentality in our studios, our teams know that if they go about in dealing with these risks in that methodical, rigorous, intelligent way, we will support them. And they'll have the time and the space to be able to set out those arguments and promulgate and advocate for those positions. And there's also, there must be about 40 different WhatsApp groups within our organization with all slightly different nuanced sort of emphasis. And there's a huge body of knowledge here. So how we communicate those ideas and those themes, it's a mutual support group. So you've encountered this problem. You're a design engineer. You're in your mid-20s. You've got this, you're an inherently bright, intelligent, well-educated person. You've encountered a problem for the first time, but there's probably 15, 20, even 50 people in this organization that have done something similar before. And in just making that information available and opening up those channels and encouraging that dialogue, there is a way for that individual to be able to get the support and confidence to be able to challenge somebody else in the system that's preventing them or acting as a barrier to pursuing that particular design strategy. So it's nuanced and in many respects quite complex and sophisticated.
Yeah.
But that's the ambition.
Yeah. I mean, I think you gave a good answer in that. A big part of that is support from leadership and leading by example, quite frankly, and, supporting people in their ways. I mean, I just feel like sometimes I see budgets shrinking, but problems getting bigger. And to me, that doesn't line up well, because when problems are bigger, you need more time to figure them out. And then the other end of it, people are trying to get projects done quicker and things like that. But it sounds like you need leadership that will advocate for you and for your projects to say, and I've done this with some of our large custom training projects that we've done, like, we need more time to work on this if you want us to help your people develop their leadership skills the right way. Right. And so there has to be some give and take there. And speaking of some of those bigger challenges that we're dealing with, I do want to talk about climate change for a few minutes. I know you referenced it earlier. I know it's something that you think a lot about. We do know that the temperatures are rising globally. How is climate change going to affect our jobs as civil engineering professionals? And, what can we do, or what will firms like yours be able to do to try to help with this challenge that we're all dealing with going forward?
Fundamental. I think, this is the second coming of engineering. If the Institution of Civil Engineers in the UK was first instituted in 1818, this is 200 plus years later. Right. This is the second coming of engineers. We are fundamental to finding out and helping solve these issues. We are in the business of decarbonisation, whether that's trying to help people live in a way that generates less carbon, or allows people to contribute in a way that is just inherently more sustainable, and whether that's through materials or lifestyle choices, how people move. There's whatever policy our respective governments choose to enact, it typically manifests itself in the built environment.
Right.
There is some bit of it that ends up as a physical thing in our space. I appreciate we're talking about the metaverse at times and a whole digital twin, and that is going to happen and is already happening, and that's, in many respects, that's a good thing. But living in the real world and dealing with reality, there is the built environment, and we as engineers have a fundamental and key role to play in that. And what a privilege, and the potential and opportunity there for our profession is incredible.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there. And Honestly, it's probably something that you and I could do a whole nother episode on, so I won't go too much into it right now. But I just see it as, in terms of a civil engineer, if you're watching this show and you're a civil engineer at any stage of your career, you're probably going to be working on projects certainly related to climate change going forward in the future. And we all together, I think, can play a role in the solution, or multiple kinds of solutions or things that can be done to help with the challenge. And it's just something that I think we've already heard a lot about it. It's a big issue, but in civil engineering circles, I think you're starting to hear more about it when it comes to projects, looking at the project plan, project considerations, which is a good thing, and I think we're looking at doing a series on our civil engineering podcast around it. And I think, Stephen's someone who would be perfect to get involved in that as well, because it's something that we need to just put more attention onto, because it is inherent in what we do. And any legislation, like you said, policies come back to the built environment. So how can civil engineers not be right there and be critical and fundamental in any of these changes that are happening?
Yeah, look, you're speaking to a brother in arms here, Anthony. I totally signed up to that agenda. I do think that from the provenance of materials to the application of those materials to the retrofitting of existing buildings, every aspect if we view it all through a decarbonisation lens, the opportunity and the reliance on civil engineers is absolutely vital, up front and centre.
All right, Stephen. So I'm going to wrap us up with this one last question here. And what I want to ask you is, what do you feel is maybe one of the most important skill sets or traits for civil engineering professionals to have today? And I know there's probably a bunch, but pick one maybe that stands out to you that you feel is really fundamental to our success in today's climate.
Well, I mean, during the course of this conversation, there's kind of one or two of them that have emerged. I think the emotionally intelligent point is a key attribute and a key quality. I really feel as though our training in our professions and through our universities and colleges places a high emphasis on technical excellence. And I'm not suggesting for one moment that we should not be technically excellent. That's entry level, right? But it's then what you do with that technical excellence, because how we are empathetic and apply that with a much more or higher degree of empathy is absolutely vital, particularly when you think about climate change, and just being really sensitive to the reuse of natural stone on pavements, or concrete buildings that are looking for another 50 years worth of life, whatever it may be, just being really, really thoughtful in that sense. I also think being courageous is an undervalued virtue in this space, because if you believe in something and you've managed to convince yourself that it's the right answer, you should be prepared to advocate and champion and promote that strategy and disrupt things to a certain extent. The status quo is not working. The good news is we've never been this sophisticated in our entire existence as a species. We've never had so many sort of positives as a species, but we've clearly got a long way to go to get to where we need to be. The cost of getting to this point has been carbon, and actually here we now are with all of this learning, all of this access to the likes of AI or the processing power of computing, communications. I mean, this conversation is a great example of sharing of knowledge and ideas in completely different geographies. So we've got all of these tools and all of these resources at our disposal. So being able to disrupt things and champion and break new ground and promote new ideas and then deliver them does require courage. Just accepting convention and the status quo is not going to get us to where we need to be. So I think that point about courage is absolutely key.
Yeah, that's great. And going back to some of the things we talked about today, I do think for civil engineering professionals to have that courage and that confidence, certainly the mentoring and the guidance and the support of their leadership in their organizations is helpful for that. I mean, of course, you want everyone to be able to go out and do it, but you really need that group around you. And it sounds like, Stephen, you and your leadership are doing a great job in inspiring your teams there. So once again, Stephen O'Malley, Stephen's a founding director of Civic Engineers, and he's super passionate, of course, about urban infrastructure and everything that goes into it. Stephen, thank you so much for taking some time with us here on the Civil Engineering CEO.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation, Anthony. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Stephen. He's a really thoughtful, very cerebral civil engineer, and he is really interested in really making the world a better place, right? Investing in these communities to help people have really the best lives that they can have, and that's what we can do as civil engineers. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider subscribing to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.